All right, everyone, welcome to the IRLS Skills School. Tonight we're incredibly excited to welcome Tegan. Uh, Tegan is over in the UK and tonight is going to be going over claim your real name. Tegan, we thank you for coming over and spending some time with us and look forward to seeing what you've got to teach us.
Absolutely. So I'm going to be teaching you about, it's called the limited company process. So limited company being, you can apply it in any country in the world. So I'm saying limited company because we call them limited companies in England. I believe you call them private limited companies there. So it's about a status correction and claiming your name. So what happens is the name you're using now, you're born, you're told when you're born, this is your name. You're raised with that name, you go to school, you're told this is you. Are you present? Please stand up. And there's like an indoctrination going on. So throughout your whole life, every ID, everything, you think this is your name, but in reality it's not your name because you don't own it. And this process teaches you to claim the name, to actually own the name. So obviously, legal disclaimer for everyone, I'm not legally qualified. If you want proper legal advice, please contact a qualified legal expert. Copyright, of course, you guys have the right to use this presentation. I don't mind about that in this recording. This was from a previous one. So in summary, I'm going to start now. So the limited company process is essentially a status process correction. This will enable us to take us out of the system. So here I'm using the United Kingdom Limited because that's a registered corporation. So what you have to look at it is there's a parent company somewhere in the world that's either in Vatican State, Washington District of the Columbia, or in City of London. And within there, they've registered this master corporation that owns every country essentially as a corporation. So it feeds up to the parent-child structure like a pyramid. And what we'll want to do is, if you want to be still in this system, so using your bank account, but have a protection like a minefield around you, this process will teach you how to be in the system with protections. So what we want to do, I've used the United Kingdom Limited here. It would be like, for example, New Zealand Limited or something. I'm sure there's a company registered for your country. You just have to check it. So yeah, just apply that to that. So the reason we want to do this, it will put us in the private. We're no longer under, I would call them these corrupt elites jurisdiction, and it's completely easy and quickly to set up normally in a country. Like, it will depend on which country you're in when you're setting these up. Obviously, the cost will vary. For England, it's about approximately £80, and you can do it in 5 minutes. It does sound impossible, but it's really easy to do. So I'll show you how when we go forward. So before we start, I'm just going to go, why do corporations have no capacity for mandated powers of authority? So it's all to do with the debtor, and they treat you as the debtor when you go into court. And debtors lose 100% of the time. So for example, when they issue an invoice or a fine against you, you become the debtor. But most people don't dispute that and counter issue invoices and fines. So what this is saying is the power to examine the debtor as to what debts were due to him did not extend to a corporation. It's a totally different entity. So to which obviously an oath would not be administered. So hence, this is why we want to claim the corporation. I know most other groups are saying there's a straw man, there is a corporation. That's something called an implied. I mentioned when you grow up, you're told this is your name, but you don't own it. So you're taking full responsibility and liability for an implied corporation without owning it. So we'll take a look at contract law, so civil law only, and the name / the person. So we all attach ourselves to the name given to us, but the fun fact is we really don't own that. And how many of you here can say you actually own your name? So the sad reality is it was simply given to us to use. So the system then proceeds to build an attachment around that name, and it tries to create this joinder with it to extort money from us to keep us poor. Hence this whole agenda, 2030. You have like the hazard circular, which I'll go towards at the end of this process as well. So the only way anyone can have authority over you is when you claim it to be the legal name. So this is where we're going to show, for example, Black's Law. If we take a look at Black's Law for a minute, Black's Law Dictionary, this was the 6th dictionary that I used to define this, defines the name as the Christian name and the surname put together. And this is why they will always write to you with the Christian name and the surname. And there's a specific reason why they do this. So in their legalese system, they can't write to you as your first name only. And surnames are only a new thing that was brought in around the 1800s, right? So they need to write to your first name and your surname because this will create the legal name, the implied, and how they do the contract. So even if it's upper lowercase, it's still considered a legal name. And it's not until you agree and give consent to that legal name that they then have a contract with you in that legal name and write to the whole legal name in capital letters. So an example of this is if you're getting a credit card and say they want to sell it to you, when they first start engaging with you normally, they'll write your name in upper lowercase. But say you decide to take out that product of credit card, all of a sudden it's in an all capitals name. And that's when they've created that fake corporation, because they think you won't own it. You won't own the title deed. And this is exactly what I've just said here, you know. So I will, this is because now you've basically entered into a contract in play that you unknowingly agreed to. And this is because they wrote in the legal name in the first place, you know. So if we break it down, they wrote to an implied company essentially that you didn't own and you have no control over. You just accepted full responsibility and liability for it. Now, that doesn't sound like a great deal to me. Maybe to some people that might, but to me, that definitely does not sound like a fantastic deal. So they didn't write to John, as you would know John. They wrote to John Doe, or John Doe all caps. And you believed because you attached yourself to your name that was you, but it's not. So how does the limited company process and contracts apply? So what happens when you create a limited company and your certified copy of an entry name? Now that's what we call the birth certificate in England, a certified copy of an entry. I'm not sure what you guys call it there. It could just be a birth certificate, but that's what we call it over here. That's why I'm using that terminology here. So once the name John Doe is incorporated as John Doe Limited, for example, the director of that company, which is written John Doe, all capital surname, can contract with other directors of other companies. But if the director of another company didn't contract with John Doe Limited, then there's no contract, because the onus is then on them to prove the contract in writing, where it's signed and by the director of your company, right? So when someone's writing to you and saying, you have a contract with us, prove it, you know? So you're like, well, you know, I'm checking my company filings. I can't see any contracts with you. Can you please provide a contract within a proper written signed contract within 14 days? Failure to provide a proper written signed contract within 14 days will be the party's admission no contract exists. This type of correspondence you could be having with them. So typical naming conventions. So what happens when you create a limited company in your birth certificate name or your certified copy of an entry name? So once John Doe is incorporated into John Doe Limited, the director of that company, which is written John Doe. Oh, sorry, this is a duplicate. I apologize. Always ensure that, you know, important steps when you're doing this process. One thing I want to absolutely clarify here is you ensure you deal with other companies with notices and not letters. Don't do it on the phone. Don't do it via email. They can ignore these things, and from my experience, it backfires on you. So you always want to send a notice, not a letter, not a phone call. You know, they can say that didn't exist. They can delete the data, right? But when you're sending your own notice, it's your own copyright. You're sending it recorded delivery. So it's a totally different ball game. And you're obviously giving legal notice to the directors of that company. So if you're being pursued by a billing company for an alleged payment, for example, you simply, I'm saying go to company's house here. That would be the English equivalent. You would do your own country's place where your companies are registered, you know, that's what we call it in England. You'd find out the name of the director of that company that's pursuing you. So normally when someone writes to you with a bill or an invoice, on the bottom right-hand corner, on the back of the page, they've got their company and their company registration number. I would search the company registration number, confirm the company name is correct, so they're not using a style, first of all. So you could be John Doe trading as, because if you write to a style, if you send a legal notice, it's not legally valid. And sometimes they try to trick you with these styles and stuff like that. So that's one thing to look out for. And then just check the details are correct. The directors are correct. You can also get the correct company address that you have to write to. Sometimes they can put fake PO box addresses. When you're proceeding to write a notice to said director, as the director of your company, what you're going to do for then is ask for any existing contracts they hold with your company, and you're going to tell them that this is required specifically for your company filing. There's a gap. They're saying there's a bill owed. You can't find it. And the reason you're doing this is you need it for audit purposes and your own company filing. And you need to remember that the director runs the company and has full responsibility and also liability or limited liability with these private companies. And you want the whole thing, the burden is on them to provide proof. So the claim is in the form of contract between your company and theirs. They have to provide proof. So the types of protection that can be given by this route. So I find it amazing. I use it all the time. We'll talk about trademarks later, how that's company property, but the protection it offers is just amazing. I've had so many successes with it. So essentially what the limited company does is it puts us in a private with multiple minefields around us. So we're no longer under their jurisdiction. We own the title deed, that's ours, but it puts us back into private. And what I mean by that is nobody has authority over the legal fiction anymore, apart from you, because you've claimed it. So you can still hold a passport, you can still hold your driver's license, you can still do all that. It's not going to change anything. But what you want to do is you're just the director of the company. Now, what I meant to mention is this company remains dormant. It never trades. So you don't open a bank account in the company name or anything like that. You keep it completely dormant. You do some filing once or twice a year, depending on which country you're in, and just leave it at that. If you want to trade with another company, start another one up. So you could have John Doe Limited, or some people have a middle name, John Jane Doe Limited, as the birth certificate name. Just start another company up that's similar if you want to trade.
So
So don't touch the dormant company at all. Do you have a question?
sorry to interrupt you. I just got a quick question. So you take your birth certificate name and you go to your country's company registrar and you actually register your name as a limited liability company.
Yes, exactly. So what happens is when you're born, you have the birth certificate, right? So I'm guessing Commonwealth countries, or ex-Commonwealth countries such as yourselves, right? They
Yes.
normally have crown copyright, and people believe that that's the copyright to the name and everything like that. But that's not what copyright is. What they mean by the crown copyright is the template on the document they're using. So, for example, when you have like a Word document, I don't know if you've been in a corporate structure, you open something online like a template, it's got specific boxes, it's got their logos, it's got a specific design, right? That's the copyright. But what you're doing is then going out and buying an implied name, because you wouldn't be able to buy it if it was already taken. So it's very important to know that. But going back to your question, yes. So you have your name, your birth certificate name, which could be John James Doe, right? Just as an example. You can buy that as a private limited company, and then all contract with how they write to you would either be in that name. Now, what happens is, I'll talk about it later, is they may write just to John Doe, right? But yours is John James Doe. And this is where we get into the trademark. I'll talk about that a bit later. Does that make sense?
That does, yes. Awesome, thank you.
No problem. So if we look at a limited company, one of the ways an individual can take authority over the legal name is by registering the name in a legal company, or a limited company, or a private limited company, depending on where you are, is how they're called, right? So when said individual buys their limited company, private limited company, and their certified copy of an entry name, they receive a title deed, right? And they become the owner of the name in law, and nobody has a contract with that company because it's new and it's dormant, right? So this is it. What we're saying, you get the actual paperwork and the title deed. A lot of the time when you're in court or these types of things, they never listen to you because you're using an implied. They don't have to listen to you. It's also with the courts. I've been told a summons is because you're dead, right? They're summoning you. They consider you like a stock in a warehouse, and they're just summoning that stock, for an inventory check, and that stock can't talk. And that's why you have to have the representative there, the solicitor, the lawyer, unless you represent yourself. So you need to take back full control of what you're doing. You have to consider it like you're a vessel, or there's a vessel out at sea. It's abandoned, You're just claiming that. You're bringing it back to the dock, and you're mooring it. You're tying it up, and you're putting a fence around it with a security system, and no one can get in or out without your permission. It's totally dormant. You're not using it, But that's essentially what you're doing. So this is an example of a person's legal name. So remember that your legal name is not the same as generally called what you're known by, right? So a name is normally what you're known by, but the way they've tricked us with the indoctrination is they've attached us to the legal name itself. So Lord Justice Ormond, in the case of DBB, FAM 38, so the Court of Appeal held that in common ground that the surname in common law is simply the name by which the person is generally known, right? So if you change your name, it doesn't matter in what end of the document, so if it's a marriage certificate or deed poll, you use as proof of the name change, and this is a fact, so, right? So we recommended in England to do something with the Royal Courts of Justice over here, where you can get a slight change to the name. So you can put a hyphen in if you've got two middle names, you know, and write the name correctly. This will also give you another title deed. But well, from my further study, what I realized, unfortunately, with the Royal Courts of Justice was it was actually Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals trading as a trade style Royal Courts of Justice. So once I figured that out, I'm not 100% sure we can use that document anymore, because trade styles, as I said, is not valid. It's just a name, a fake entity they've created, like an implied. And then that's what we've also noticed with further study. They still use like something called a Queen's Bench stamp instead of King's Bench now. These types of things haven't been updated. But this legal precedent with the name still applies. The name is only what you're known by. So you need to detach yourself from the name. You are not the name. The name is a property. Same as your phone, same as a car. So it's only what you're known by. So if you look at types of titles, you know, especially of nobility and stuff like that are officially recognized. Here is a list of British titles. You know, I'm using the UK here. I know people will go crazy for saying it's a corporation, but just as an example, right? So this is a copy and paste from the government website. So all the titles, so all members of the House of Lords, including archbishops and bishops, their wives and families, they are, you know, get specific titles. Baronets, holders, knights, and their wives, they get specific titles. Baronesses and holders of damehoods. So the husbands of dames of the realm do not have titles. This is, of course, not fair, but the whole system is hardly fair, right? So other titles, also your status. So this is where they get you, right? So they call you Mr., Mrs., Miss, MX, or Master, right? Or professional titles, you're a judge, a doctor, an MP, Justice of the Peace. But what they don't tell you is a limited tops all of these on the title scale, right? So you never want to have one of these titles assigned to you. We have something in England called the Equalities Act 2010, and they cannot misgender you. I believe you probably have something similar over there. Get them to remove the title from the name. So you don't want a title. So your name is, you know, you'll use the legal name because you'll own the title deed. And then what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the trademark later on, how to use it as property. So just remove the title completely. You don't want that. Anything that comes in the post with a Mr., you don't want to touch that, you know. You only want something that's either John Doe Limited, which you can answer because it's going to be the registered company. Or if you find out they're using John Doe, once you register that as a trademark and it's owned by the company, you can go after them. Why using company property? But I will talk about that a bit later. So there's a catch. So law isn't legal, right? This is what they've changed now. So common law isn't legalese, but what they've done now is they've tried to merge the two, and they only look at legal systems. So a lot of the times when you go into court, they're called administrative courts. And what that means is they're just soliciting the funds between two parties instead of actually looking at law. I'm talking about civil, obviously, tort here. So what we need to do now is we must capture the name in a trademark. And what that's doing is you're capturing the name as a property. So it's called a word mark type thing. And this trademark is going to be owned by the new dormant limited company. So just for those who don't know what a trademark is one of the highest forms of legal documents someone can get. And by owning the trademark of said name, the name becomes the property of that company, right? So you now have a legal registered trademark of the name that's owned by your limited company or private limited company. So what does this mean and how can it help you? So quite simply put, there's no other company that can use that property without your permission, right? And the trademark is your company's property. So it's a totally different entity to you. So John Doe got an invoice, but John Doe Limited owns the trademark. They're using the company's property, right? So in England, we have the Fraud Act 2006. There's something called gain and loss in that. where it's to the detriment of your company, but their company is gaining from it, right? They're trying to invoice, they're trying to gain something. So this is how you can go after them. Another example is here, say a debt collection agency sends a bill to your trademark name, which is the property of the limited company. This is essentially the debt collection agency doing commerce for financial and commercial gain with your company property without your explicit authorization, or another word, of fraud. And this is where you call them on it. So what is trademark infringement, for those who don't know? So a trademark is infringed when another person or a business uses a registered trademark without permission, or they don't have permission to do so. So like a contract, but you can't have anything in place because your company's dormant and you're setting it up, right? So they can't have the right to use it. So using the same mark as a registered trademark on the same type of goods and services. So a trademark, what I mean by this is trademarks are made up of 45 classes that you can choose from. Each class is a specific goods and services. So for example, just in this example, this isn't the correct way they've done it, but class 1, could be metals and petrochemicals and stuff like that. And you would go in and you would choose, the same with another class, you choose, I want invoicing in my trademarks, goods and services on this particular class. I want legal stuff. I want solicitors. I want financial stuff. I want mortgages. And you can go and look at all this type of stuff and say, what do I actually want to protect, And then you can go get that protection for 10 years. So that's how long the trademark lasts. So what this does is it stops people having a similar name, product, or design or logo, because that's your established brand now for that company. Even though it's dormant, that's that. Now, even though the company is dormant, you can still protect company properties. So people think, if the company is dormant, how can I own property? Dormant companies can own properties. That's absolutely fine. They have no issue with that. How do you buy the trademark? You would have to pay with your personal account money, obviously. But when you're setting it up, you would say, this is the company's. And normally when you're setting up a company and keeping it dormant, you can keep it dormant for so many years because you're setting up the company. So for example, if you're designing a software, you're allowed to have the company registered, you're allowed to have your trademark in place while you build the software. And it could take years to build it, it's not ready for a public release yet. So that's all you're doing as an example, And then a lot of people will go, well, I'm not using the trademark so they can get it voided, So if someone is using the name, the property, and the trademark, and you're invoicing them, that's considered you trying to use it, right? So what I mean by invoicing them is, obviously you have to send a cease and desist first. There's a particular process you must follow. You must give them the potential to have this remedy. So you tell them, cease and desist. This is a registered trademark. You ask them about what we said earlier about contracts with your company. And if they don't have any, it's their admission that they don't have any. And then you attach a fee schedule to the bottom. If they use it again, then you invoice them from the company. And then obviously they're not going to pay. So you follow the same process that they would do. You send them a reminder, you send them a, notice of arrears, this type of thing. And you'd follow what they would do against you to them, and then they become the debtor. And remember, the debtor loses 100% of the time. So one thing I want to mention with trademarks is that I've noticed that what we have in England, and we get them from all over Europe as well, is these particular postal scams after you register your trademarks. I just wanted to make everyone aware of that. So after registering, it's quite common to get letters or either pretending to be from, we call it the intellectual property office here, or from third-party companies offering to monitor your trademark. From my experience, these are all scams, and a lot of them come from Eastern Europe. So what I have here is an example of one that was sent to me. So here you can see, this is their company website. Looks pretty legit, actually. And this is their trademark. They're saying, as the owner, you owe us this fee until this time, absolute bollocks. So they're trying to just get money off me after registering my trademark. And then, okay, I go to the on the right-hand side is the envelope. So I could see with this logo, what exactly was the company name, And then I could see, okay, well, that's weird. It's coming from Budapest, Hungary, that's a bit weird. So what's going on? I was able to find from their logo down here in tiny writing, it was called worldwide-trademarks.co.uk. So I'm like, why does that have a .co.uk web address? So I went to their website, to the bottom of the page. There's no company information really at all. They've got this worldwide trademarks. They put a London address, but we know this is coming from Budapest, Hungary. So there's well, what's going on here? So I investigated a bit further. So I went on the equivalent of a search repository of the government database of registered companies in England. And this is what I found for that registered company at that address. So I couldn't find that company that's called Worldwide-Trademarks, but I searched that address and I found this person called Angel Trademark Services International Limited. So this was a Canadian national, but stuff was coming out from Hungary. So there was like definitely some fraud going on here. So if you gave them money, obviously it would disappear, you know. But what I also did was I went to the people, and then in the people I went to the person of significant control, not just the directors. So you want to do that investigation, and you want to hold them liable as well. And that could be another company. So what you do is when that's another company, you do the same. You get their directors, that company name, that company registered number, person of significant control, and you keep doing that until you get to the end, you know. Sometimes it can be 10 corporations, 15 corporations, but you want to hold them all liable. And you can give them all notices of liability with the notice to agent, notice to principal, notice to principals, notice to agent, and successor type thing. You know, you're notifying everyone, because what happens is once they're subsidiaries, they'll have contracts in place to say, oh, we can use the same data or the same systems. And this is how you hold them all liable. So upon further check, I was able to see who owned the domain, when was it registered and all this. And this just led to further review that it was definitely fraud. So I just wanted to show you, just be very careful what goes on there, because once you register it, that's your property and they don't have a right to use it. Yeah. So just don't get scammed. Another thing people always talk about is copyright. So I'm going to give you what is copyright. So copyright protects your work and stops others from using it without your permission. So you get copyright protection automatically. You don't have to apply or pay a fee. Sometimes in America, they say you have to, but it doesn't make sense because it's automatically there and it's free. There isn't a register of copyright works in the UK, for example. So what they're saying is you automatically get copyright protection when you get original literacy, that could be your notices, dramatic, musical, or artistic work, including illustrations or photography, original non-literacy work. So if you're developing a software or a website or a database, that's also your copyright. Sounds and music recordings, film and television recordings, broadcasts, the layout of published editions of written, dramatic, or musical works. And you can mark your work with the copyright symbol, but you don't have to, you know, it's automatically there. You automatically have the copyright. So what happens, the way I look at this is everyone is, you know, our life expectancy on this world is finite, you know, until we move on to the next one. So our time here, we're writing a book of our life constantly, you know, whether it's notices or whatever, you know, we just haven't published that book yet. So that's our literacy work. So everything we do, you know, we're kind of writing these diaries and documenting what's going on. Everything you do in life, and you're sending emails to whatever, you know, all the chat messages on your phone. So that's all your copyright. So you got to remember, they can't be sharing your copyright or your notices with other people. So you can get them on that as well. So how does copyright protect your work? Copyright prevents people from copying your work, distributing copies of it, whether it's free or for charge or for sale, renting or lending copies of your work. So again, your notices, they can't distribute them. Performing or showing, playing your work in public space, making adaptation of your work, putting it on the internet, and copyright overseas. So your work could be protected by copyright in other countries through international agreements. So one example is in Switzerland, they have something called the Berne Convention. Most countries or corporations, however you want to look at them, have signed this. So you get that protection for about 50 years. I think it's for most types of written work, dramatic and artistic, and then at least 25 years for photographs and different other types of work. So some quick things with Black's Law I just wanted to show you. So this is in my words, this is in the Black's Law dictionary, for example. So men of straw, we talk about the straw man. This is men who is used in a former days to apply about courts of law, so-called for their manner of making known their occupation. So i.e. a straw in one of their shoes. And it's recognized by the name of the straw shoes. An advocate or a lawyer who wanted to convene witness who knew by these signs were to meet with one, and colloquy between the parties was brief. So don't you remember, said the advocate, to which the ready answer was, to be sure I do. So what they're saying here is, you know, that they're using the straw man in the legalese system. Same for corporation. So if you look at what they consider a corporation, you got to remember they use a different dictionary to us. just because you can read and understand the language on these legal documents, or you think you understand it, doesn't mean you actually understand what it's actually meaning, because it's in a different, they're using a different language, a different dictionary. So legalese is a different language. It's got totally different meaning for the words. It's the same with sign language. It's a totally different language. So just because you think you can read it doesn't mean you can actually understand it and respond to it. So a corporation, an artificial person or legal entity created by or under the authority of the laws of the state or a nation. So composed in some rare instances of a single person and his successors, being the incumbents of a particular office, there you go, the corporation, but ordinarily consisting of an association of numerous individuals who subsist as a body of political under a special dominion. Yeah. So just, it's just so important to understand these meanings when you're writing notices and understand what exactly you're saying. Make sure you're using the correct legal dictionary, whether it's Halsbury's Law Dictionary or Black's Law. How are you quoting this to them? You know, what definitions of the words are you using? So a corporate legal individual, for example, as a municipal corporation, possesses two kinds of power. So a governmental and public. This is where they normally trick us, right? And a proprietary and private. And an exercise of the former, a corporation, is municipal government, while as the latter, it's a corporate legal individual. So that's where they get the corporate person, right? And then you have the corporate name. When a corporation is erected, a name is always given to it, or supposing none to be actually given, will attach to it by an implication, so the implied, and by that name alone, it must sue and be sued. You know, so you can't use a trade style. That's what I was saying earlier. And this is the same in all legal acts through very minute variation therein in not material. So, and the name is capable of being changed, of course, but you have to register that without affecting the identity of the capacity of the corporation. So they're just saying you can change your name at any time if you want to, the corporate name. I won't go through all of these, but I just, I want you to understand the difference between public and private. So a public corporation is one that's created by the state for political purposes and to act as an agency, administration, and civil government, and is generally within the particular territory or subdivision of a state, and is usually invested in for that purpose solely, right? So we substitute a local powers of legislation, such as a county, city, town, or school district. And these are also sometimes called political corporations. And then private corporations are those founded by, composed of private individuals for private purposes. And then again, we have person and artificial person. So a person in this legal dictionary is a man considered according to the rank he holds in society. So that's what I was saying with the titles. You got to be very careful not to accept those titles, with all the rights to which the place he holds entitles him and the duties to which it imposes. So a human being considered as capable of having rights and of being charged with duties. So while a thing is subject over which rights may be exercised. And then you have an artificial person. So an artificial person, such as are created and devised by law for the purposes of society and government, and they're called the corporations or the bodies of political. So you also have natural persons, but I've never seen the natural person reference in UK law. So normally when they have these acts and statutes, they give you a definition of what they're using, So they never tell you 100% that they're trying to trick you, but you can figure it out. So natural persons are such formed by nature and distinguished from artificial persons. So they're trying to say you're living. And then you have something called a private person, and that's an individual who is not incumbent of an office. You also have something called a dead letters. So what happens is when you return a letter, return to sender, addressee unknown for letters you don't know, when you get these types of people you don't know, these letters are which the postal departments has not been able to deliver. The persons for whom they were intended, they don't know, right? So it goes to something called a dead letter office. And this is where they're opened. And if they can find a return address, because not all, like, for example, bailiffs and stuff put return addresses on their letters, they'll try ascertain who owns the letter and who they can send it back to. Otherwise, it may just come back to you again. And then I just want to say law Latin. So this is a definition of that. So the corrupt form of Latin language employed in the old English law books and legal proceedings, hence legalese or dog's Latin. Another thing, a word people always use is society, but the definition of that in a legal context is an association or a company of persons, generally not incorporated, you know? So just be aware if you're using this type of terminology. We mentioned the legal name earlier. So under common law consists of one Christian name, one surname, and the insertion, omission, or mistake in the middle name. So they don't always use it, they're saying, you know? So it could just be John Doe instead of John James Doe. Again, dog Latin, so the Latin of illiterate persons. This is essentially what they think we can't understand what they're saying. They're fooling us with the language. So Latin words put together in English grammatical system, so the legalese system. Another one I wanted to introduce you to is a foundling. So I don't know if you ever noticed with child hospitals, they're always called foundling hospitals. And the reason it's called a foundling hospital is because the definition, a deserted or exposed infant, a child found without a parent. So when your child is born and they bring you to these foundling hospitals, this is where they start this whole process to fool you. And obviously we have like a definition of a man, so a human being, a person of a male sex, and the male of a human species above the age of puberty. Legal title, which you mentioned earlier, so one cognizable or enforceable in the court of law, or which is completed and perfect, so that as regards to the apparent right of its ownership and possession. That's what I'm saying. You're getting the title deeds, and this is what a lot of people don't have, is title ownership of the name. And then we have the corporation de facto, so one existing under the color of law and pursuant of effort made in good faith to an organized corporation under the statute. So your acts and laws. So yeah, I won't go through all these. I think I have quite a lot, but yeah, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll just quickly go through them. If you want to pause the presentation, you can see this. And then I just want you to mention this hazard circular. So this was a book written in 1862, and it was handed out between private bankers at the time. And it was at the time when they were getting rid of slavery in the States. And this was a quote from one of them in the book, one of the bankers. So I'll just read it out to you here. So it says, slavery is likely to be abolished by the war power and chattel slavery destroyed. This I and my European friends are in favor of, for slavery is but the owning of the labor and carries with it the care of the laborer, while the European plan, led by England, is capital control of labor by controlling the wages. This is how they got us with the debt slaves and the fiat currency. And this can be done by controlling the money. The great debt that capitalists will see is to it is made out of war, hence what we see a lot nowadays, must be used as a measure to control the volume of money. So to accomplish this, the bonds must be used as a banking basis. And what we see now is we are waiting to get the Secretary of the Treasury to make the recommendation to Congress. And this was obviously passed. It was passed all in Europe as well. And this is exactly what's going on. They're controlling us via the money supply. So you got to realize the money we're using is owned by a central bank. That is the property of that central bank, and that central bank is a private corporation. So, for example, if I've got £20, before that used to be, I promised to pay the bearer of £20 in silver or gold, whatever it was pegged against, right? But now they don't peg it, and it's got no value. So whenever you're using this, you're paying, a tax or whatever to use their property, which is essentially useless. And this is how they're able to just control it, take it from us, whatever. We don't actually own it. We're using another company's property. And yeah, just getting to the end of this. Obviously, if you liked what you saw here, you can scan this barcode. I have a Telegram page. I have a website, obviously, as well, where I do workshops every 2 weeks and stuff like this, or help people do advanced trademarks and stuff like that, depending on what you want. But yeah, please join if you like what you hear. There's a lot more information online about this. This was obviously a very quick overview presentation. But yeah, any questions, please let me know.
I just want to say thank you, Tegan, for going out of your way and spending some time with me and going over this for our group. I think there's some very interesting and insightful information in here that is quite different to what we've had presented previously by other concepts of strawman stuff. And I'm sure there will be
there'll
some
be
questions.
101 questions, so I could always come back if there is, absolutely.
Once it sinks in, but I did have one question, and because you hit me with quite a bit of information quickly, I'm going to have to ask you. You were talking about the City of London, Washington D.C.
Yeah, the District of Columbia one, not the state. Yeah.
Yeah. So District of Columbia, and is it Rome? The three,
Yeah, so Vatican City, yeah. So these are
right?
the three places that I recognize where the major powerhouses and privacy things. So I don't know if you know Dun and Bradstreet, right? Have
Yes.
you ever heard of a Dunn's number?
No.
So a Dunn's number, you have credit reference agencies, right? They get their information actually from a company called Dun and Bradstreet, and you get something called it. Whenever you register a corporation, you'll see if you register one of these private limited companies, is they'll issue you a Dunn's number, or you'll have a Dunn's number issued automatically. They won't tell you, and that's a credit reference check for the U.S. So they see, can the U.S. corporation do business with these corporations? And then what happens is Dun and Bradstreet were like, oh, but we can actually sell this data as credit worthiness of the company. So what you'll see is a lot of these courts and government bodies and stuff will have something called a Dun and Bradstreet number. But on the Dun and Bradstreet itself, it explicitly states only a corporate body or corporate entity or a company can have it, not a public body, not a governmental body, only a corporate structure. So, for example, if you're in court and as a private limited company, they're going to try to deny that to you. But the fun fact is, how do they get their salaries? It's from a corporate bank account. It's not coming from the exchequer. You know what I mean? So this is
Yep.
how they're fooling us.
So I don't know how this will sit with other people watching this, but my studies and research indicates that the Vatican, the City of Rome, the Holy Roman Church, the Holy Roman Empire,
Mhm.
this is the continuation of it via the Vatican and its um, satellite offices, DC, and in the City of London. So this is
Mhm.
the beast system carried forward that we're actually up against here. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, absolutely right. So they took over about a couple of hundred years ago. They seized everything on the planet and put it in a trust. They said, "You're too stupid to mind it yourself, so we're going to mind it for you and run it for you," essentially. And that's essentially what they've done, and that's why you had the Knights Templar and then the massive persecution of that. The Knights Templar used to have their own fleets, massive armies. They used to go around the world, patrolling the worlds and enforcing stuff. And then they kind of had this war with the Vatican, and they were kind of shunned upon in Europe and stuff. And there was a lot of, they were burning them, they were killing them whenever they found them and stuff. And that kind of digressed into like the Masons you see and stuff like that. So you have this whole history about this infighting going on between them, but it's essentially they believe they own you as property and they can do what they want with you. They own your soul. This is the problem. Obviously, they don't, but this is what they believe. And in order to fight them in that system, you need to have the checks and balances. For example, if you registered a trademark, this is what all the really rich celebrities do from my research. So like Elon Musk does it for his sons, the Kardashians do it for their kids and everything, right? All their kids' names are private limited companies, essentially, or LLCs in America. They have a worldwide trademarks, they're obviously a bit more expensive. They absolutely cover everything in that trademark. No one can use that name. We had an issue in England recently. I don't know if you've heard of Game of Thrones. It was quite a popular
yeah,
TV series, where some child had the same name as one of the characters, and that was trademarked. They refused to give them a passport because of the trademark infringement. These are the types of things that go on.
wow.
So it's so important to own the title deeds. People don't realize that. You don't own the name until you claim it. And yes, you can claim other people's names and stuff, but be nice about it. Don't abuse the system.
Wow. That's that's blown my mind a little bit, that Game of Thrones one. Game of Thrones one.
Yeah, let's
I
find a
mean
news article. I'll send it to you.
yeah, and it just ties into what you were saying about um the power and the copyright holding. Um Once you have your corporation set up and claimed as the director. Um
Yeah, so how many people can go out and say they actually own their name? Not many. And if you look at what we've got 7.5, nearly 8 billion people on the planet now, I'd say there's less than 5,000 people on the planet that have done this process even. There'll be people that have done little trots of it, like I'll own a trademark here or something, but they haven't fully understood the whole title deed process and why you do it.
what you have to understand the beast system and in its entirety, I think, to start with, and I think you've done a good job um of pointing out where it starts and how to get a good handle on it.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Alrighty, well, I'm not
Do
going
you
to
have
take
any?
up any more
Yeah,
of your
yeah.
time. I want to thank you kindly on behalf of our audience at IRLS. for sharing this incredible knowledge with us. And I wish you all the best in the future for your future endeavors and training people and waking people up and getting them out of this debt slavery.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. Thank you.